Welcome again to our federal election show. I'm Hugues Theoret, Sussex Strategy Group. We have the pleasure to have with us today Shawn McCarthy, who has been along our new senior counsel who just joined the Sussex Strategy Group. We are very happy to have him with us. Shawn is well known. He has been a long-term global energy advisor at the Globe and Mail and covering federal politics. Thanks again for joining the show. So my first question would be, climate change seems to be one of the top issues in this federal election, Shawn. How do you explain this awareness and emergency around climate change? Is it related to the millennials, the new generation, or it's related to natural disaster? So I'd like to hear you on it.
Right, I think it's both, and I'll add a third one, which is government policy, which is finally starting to be very apparent to people, and so there's more to shoot at if you're the opposition party. But just in terms of the awareness broadly, sure. I mean, we have more fiercer hurricanes in the Caribbean. We have droughts and floods and melting Arctic. So it is starting to be seen. The impacts are starting to be seen of climate change. And so broad awareness of it from that perspective. But also the millennials are far more engaged on the climate issue than I think their older brothers and sisters, parents, what have you. It's their future, and they're very much aware that it's their future. And by and large, I think the polls will show they want something done about it.
Yeah, and we will have Greta Thunberg in Montreal next week. Do you think she could have an impact on the campaign?
I think that, again, the more, and we have a student strike coming up on Friday, the more attention that is given to the issue, the more it will play out in the election. But it's not a clear winner for any particular party. The way they break down, it remains to be seen how it plays politically in terms of driving the vote.
Right. Talking about the political parties themselves, do you see big differences between environment, climate change platform among the political parties in this election?
Absolutely. So the Liberals are basically running on their record, which is not too hot, not too cold. They're serious about climate change. They participated and called it a climate emergency in a House of Commons debate. So they are fully invested, but they're also approving and even buying fossil fuel pipelines to get oil and gas to international markets. And voters who are particularly focused on climate change, I think, have trouble with that. And so the NDP and the Green Party, who have very aggressive, very costly, very aggressive commitments, I think can eat into that Liberal support for those who think that climate change is a major issue and something has to be done. The flip side is for the Conservatives, they're attacking the Liberal carbon tax. They believe that the population is not ready to pay at the household level, at least, for solutions to climate change. And so, there's an opening there for the Conservatives when there are three parties on the one hand who are urging greater or lesser degree serious action. The Conservatives can say, no, we're committed, but we're going to take it slow.
Right. In 2015, Canada signed the Paris Agreement, and the Liberal government set the bar, let's say that they set the bar pretty high, right, with their plan to cut greenhouse emissions by 30% below 2005 emissions levels by 2030. Would you say it is reasonable to think that they're going to hit the target? Because we can hear a Conservative leader, Andrew Scheer, saying no, that would not be possible to hit this target by 2030. So what's your opinion on it?
Well, a couple of thoughts there. We were on track to get close, at least, but we've actually lost ground now because a couple of the provincial governments are dismantling climate policies that were put forward by their predecessors. Alberta's Jason Kenney and Rob Ford in Ontario both pulling back. And so that puts more pressure on the federal government to come up with policies. The federal government says it's on track. It's not really, in terms of policies that have been fully enunciated and modeled to get us there. But we still have 10 years, so we are hopeful. I think the Liberal government would say that new technologies and so on will help us close the gap. One point on your comment that this was a pretty high bar, that's a comment that the Greens and the NDP and to some degree the Liberals would disagree with. That target of 30%, which was first put forward by Stephen Harper, by the way, in early 2015, is not sufficient if you sort of take it across the international spectrum and compare everybody's targets. The UN is hosting a climate change summit next week, in fact, calling on every country, including Canada, to do more before 2030, because the world is not on track to limit global warming to the degree that would avert really serious, costly consequences.
And we don't know what's going to happen on October 21st, but of course we look at the polls and it looks like it's going to be pretty close between the Liberal and the Conservative. Lots of observers are talking about high possibilities to have a minority government. So would you say that the Green Party and the NDP, even the Bloc in Quebec, they have an influence on the issue of environment and climate change in this election?
Right. So Elizabeth May has already said that she will not support a party that doesn't have a robust climate change agenda. Presumably, she would be more inclined to support the Liberals than the Conservatives on that basis. The NDP hasn't said, but yes, both the Greens and the NDP, as well as the Bloc in Quebec, are all more ambitious on the climate change agenda than the Liberals and certainly the Conservatives. And so if the price of supporting a government may be more aggressive action on climate change. Minority governments don't always work that way, though. I mean, you don't always get a deal. The Liberals, Stephen Harper ran a minority government for 2 terms where he didn't have a particular deal with either party, any of the opposition parties, and just governed and basically dared people to defeat him and call another election. So the role of a minority party and a minority government is one that there's a lot of options for both the minority party and the government to manage that.
And let's talk about energy now. Would you see energy as a top issue in this election? And would it be a ballot question? If it's not nationally, it could be in a province like Alberta in this election?
Oh, definitely in Alberta. I mean, the Albertans are feeling very hard done by that and believe that the current government is not nearly supportive of the Liberal government. The incumbents are not nearly supportive enough of the fossil fuel industry, and any comments that either Justin Trudeau or Environment Minister Catherine McKenna have made about phasing out fossil fuels have been amplified in the West to say they're opposed to an industry that is the lifeblood of Alberta and to some degree the Saskatchewan economies. So absolutely, but pipeline issues are relevant in British Columbia, the Trans Mountain pipeline that is in the process of starting up construction again with starts and stops due to court. It's actually across the province. It's in BC. The polling suggests it's got pretty good support, but it's key ridings in the suburbs of Vancouver where that issue could mean the difference in a few seats, that every seat in a very tight election is hugely important.
Yeah, I saw last polls from Angus Reid talking about Trans Mountain Pipeline. To me, as you're the expert, not me in energy, but I was a bit surprised to see that more than the double of the respondents were in favor to complete the Trans Mountain Pipeline project. Are you surprised with this big support?
I'm not really, because it's been building for a while, and I think the the message that you have to, if you're going to be selling your resources, you have to get them to the best market is one that resonates with people. I would want to look deeper though into the polling results because, you know, the support, I think, except in Alberta and Saskatchewan, the support is maybe wider but not as deep. Whereas the opposition, you know, we've heard, especially from younger voters who might support the Liberals with their climate change agenda, but they bought a pipeline, and so I can't support them on that. It's a real litmus test for a lot of environmentally aware voters. So I think, you know, the support is there. How deep is it is a question. The opposition is there, and I think it's probably deeper than the support is.
We still have, well, it's still early in the election, but still over 30 days to go. But it seems to me that we don't talk much about the renewable energy in this election. No. So do you think it's going to be discussed, an issue? And generally, how do you see the future of renewable energy in Canada?
Well, I think it will be discussed, and I think the federal government, the Liberal Party, the outgoing federal government, the incumbents, will bring out a platform that will include a lot more support for the renewable sector as part of their climate change agenda. But traditionally in Canada, energy has been a provincial, especially the electricity sector, has been a provincial responsibility, and the federal government has not been particularly aggressive on support for renewables outside a couple of niche areas. So it's not top of mind for people. I think it plays into the climate change agenda. I think, but more broadly, because I believe climate change is real and we're going to continue to see the impacts of it, I think the future of renewable energy is going to simply grow and become more mainstream as we have to try to get off fossil fuels.
Let's talk about the other pipeline, the one we have this part of the country in the east. So Energy East pipeline was canceled in 2017 by TransCanada, and of course, Alberta is pushing very hard on Ontario and Quebec to endorse the project because, of course, the pipeline needs to go by those two provinces to reach New Brunswick. What is the status of this project? Would you say it's dead in the water, or the federal elections could maybe renew this debate? And how do you see the future of this project?
So both Alberta and New Brunswick have been large supporters of Energy East, and so you have that stereo sound of support. The Conservatives federally have criticized the Liberal government for allowing that project to die and for killing it, really, although that's a debate as to whether the government did or the company did. I think the fate of Energy East depends a lot on what happens to the projects that are already on the board. So in Trans Mountain, there's a Keystone XL pipeline that's supposed to be going through the U.S. to the U.S. Gulf Coast. There's an Enbridge project. Right. If those projects go ahead, there won't be a lot of appetite, I don't believe, for Energy East. But if you don't get 2 out of the 3 of those projects, then they will be looking, the producers will be looking for new markets, and that will be an option. There's also the argument that refineries in Eastern Canada should be using Canadian oil, and so somehow the pipeline to Eastern Canada makes sense. That's more of a political argument than a market argument, and it's not clear to me that anybody's going to pay a huge premium to use Alberta oil as opposed to, frankly, most of the oil we import now is from the United States. There is some Saudi oil that goes to New Brunswick, but enough to justify a whole pipeline coming down, that's a tough financial economic argument to make. Talking
about the Energy East pipeline, Shawn, the Quebec Premier keeps saying that there is no, what he call, I'm translating, the social acceptability in Quebec for such a pipeline. Do you think it could change, not in terms of the public opinion in Quebec, but the pressure on the gas prices or any other thing that could happen in the world? Look at the attack on Saudi by drones. And do you think it could change in the next future?
And I would never say never to these things, but I actually think it's going in the other direction. I think as we talked about climate change and the increasing imperative to do something, and the Quebec, if there's one thing that Quebecers seem to agree on, and that is they are more committed on climate action than the rest of the country, especially more committed when it's not in their backyard, when it, they don't have anything to lose by the action. It's just allowing somebody to come through their backyard. No, I think if we try to revive Energy East, it's going to be a very difficult political battle, and whoever is in government is going to have their work cut out for them trying to get. It is federal responsibility to approve approve pipelines. Very similar to the situation, though, that we see in British Columbia with Trans Mountain, where you have a provincial government very opposed and the federal government supportive. At the end of the day, the federal rules are supposed to weigh, but we know how sensitive politics are with Quebec.
Exactly, and it's also hard to determine for people from outsiders, like in terms of jurisdiction.
Right.
Where's the limit of the federal jurisdiction and the limit of the provincial jurisdiction on this type of issue? It's not clear.
No.
And I don't think there's nothing in the Constitution about oil because. No. So it would be an interesting issue.
There are some provincial responsibilities around environment that have to be taken care of, but the court has ruled that the pipeline itself is under federal jurisdiction. It gets messy.
Well, it will be very interesting to follow.
All right.
Last question, Shawn. Any prediction on the issue of the next election on October 21st and how the result will be minority government or not would impact the position of the federal government on climate change and environment for the next 4 years or less?
Right. Well, I mean, until this morning, I think the Liberals had clawed back from a losing position where they were in the spring. But this blackface issue with Justin Trudeau, the old pictures of him appearing in costume and blackface, I think will hurt them and certainly throws them off their game. It has a great potential to hurt them with younger voters who are way more sensitive on these issues, and minority voters who obviously are way more sensitive on these issues. So Trudeau apologized pretty profusely. It wasn't one of these "I'm sorry if anybody was offended" kind of apologies. It was a full out "that was stupid, I should never have done it" kind of apology, and there's a difference. So we'll see how that plays out. It does look like we're heading into minority territory unless it really breaks one way or another. But at this point in the campaign, it looks like we're heading into minority territory. And as we said before, a Liberal minority with the Greens and the NDP in support would mean probably far more ambitious climate policy. A Conservative minority with cobbling up a vote by vote, staying in office kind of thing, probably less so.
Well, we'll see on October 21st. Shawn McCarthy, thanks again for your time.
All right, Hugues. Thanks very much.